All right. Well, thank you very much. My name is Jason Ray Carney. I am the managing editor of a small amateur press, Spiral Tower Press, and one of our publications is a magazine of cosmic horror. It's called Witch House, and we wanted to basically bring some attention to some of the great fiction that we're publishing, and we have this idea for an author interview series. And to start, we have asked, and she graciously accepted, Cassandra. Is it Daucus?
Daucus.
Daucus.
Yes.
To be our first interviewee. Thank you very much. And how about Nicole? Maybe say a little bit about yourself, and then we can just jump right into the questions. We can get an introduction to Cass through the questions.
Okay, and we'll cut out this little kind of figuring it out stuff, right?
No, it's staying in.
No, we're cutting it out.
Okay. Well, we can't cut out a lot because you'll see splicing, but so
it's okay.
That's a break in case of emergency thing. So, but I will cut this part out.
Yeah, I'm Nicole Heinz Carney, and I have been a long time enjoyer of cosmic horror. Obviously, I've read a lot of Lovecraft. I've also read more contemporary horror authors. I love B horror movies in particular. So like Stuart Gordon's adaptations of Lovecraft. I find those to be quite fun. And yeah, I think that's all I need to say about that.
Okay. Yeah. And you were a reader for a Witch House.
I did the poetry.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So let's kick off our first writer interview by just having Cass tell us a little bit about herself. So how long have you been writing? Did you attend or have you attended writing workshops, writing conventions? Have you had any kind of formal academic training in writing, or are you just self-taught as a writer?
All right, thanks. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. This is very cool to be asked. So, yeah, my name is Cassandra Daucus, or Cass. I've been writing for I've been writing original horror for a little over a year. So this is being recorded in November of 2023, and I've been writing since last August, probably.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I've been writing original horror. So about my background as a writer, I remember writing a couple of things when I was a kid. I was not a writer as a kid. Like, I know there are people who like wrote a lot when they were kids. I wrote like 2 or 3 things and then I got bored. This is a problem for me. I have like a very short attention span. And then I wrote something about 15 years ago that I have actually recently pulled out, and I'm going to be publishing another story that's based on that thing that I wrote 15 years ago and then forgot about. But I really started writing in about 10 years ago. I started writing fan fiction. Actually, that's how I got started with writing. And the great thing about fan fiction is it's hugely into community. So I had written, as I said, like I'd written a little bit, and I got into this thing where I was writing using existing characters and existing things, like the dynamics of the character. I don't know if you guys know much about fan fiction, but like you use existing characters and places and the character dynamics. And that was really fun for many years. I did that. And it was great to kind of learn what works. And I wrote a lot of romance because I was writing in kind of a ship, or relationship kind of thing. But I was always trying to write weird stuff too. So I was writing horror, and I was writing kind of what you would probably call speculative stuff. I definitely wrote one of the first longer things I wrote was very Lovecraftian. So I was always writing this, which meant that I wasn't a particularly popular fan fiction writer because they want to read like romance is great, and I'm like, what about the monsters? And it's like, okay. So after a while I was like, this isn't really working, and I started getting bored with having to always reuse the same characters. And then finally, last summer, I had this point where I was like, I have to either stop completely or I need to start doing something new. And that was when I started writing the kind of stuff that I'm writing now. And it was great. Like immediately I was like, oh, I can write about parents and children, and I can write about, the kind of story that I published with you, which is like really sad and, does not end happily. And so that was really great. And so to answer the other part, it's probably clear, but to answer the other part of your questions, I don't have any academic training in fiction writing. I'm actually an academic in my like real life. So I have written, book chapters and articles like that and blog posts, but that's kind of a different kind of writing. Although I feel like I'm always trying to think like an academic when I'm writing fiction. I don't know if that comes across at all. I think it comes across in like trying to be really careful, because like if you're an academic, it's like I need to make an argument. I need to be very careful about the words that I use and how I tell my story. And so I feel like that probably comes across in my fiction writing. I've attended. Yeah.
I'm going to say in the introduction to your story in Witch House, I compare it to one of Poe's psychological studies. This is like you mentioned, you're academic because philosophy of composition. Poe is, this essay. He's about distilling down the single effect that you're trying to produce in your reader. I feel like in 5 pages, like you totally do that. So that seems like an academic thing.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really glad that sort of comes across. So I have in the past year attended a few like online, like 1 hour, workshop things that have been pretty helpful in sort of helping me think through things about pacing and, how to write a good, interesting story arc. Because often in fan fiction, because what you're trying to do is like tell us a continuing story about, it can go on and on and on. And it's like, no, you actually need to have like a really strong like thing. So I'm still learning that. But this whole thing has been it's really fun. It's basically, this is my hobby and I'm having a really, really fun time just learning how to do all this stuff.
Cool.
That's excellent. And, it's something that I've told my students repeatedly. You don't have to go to school to be a creative writer. You just have to love what you do. You have to enjoy it. You should also be reading it. So like reading the genre that you want to write in is always a good idea. Obviously finding community is another, I think it's not a necessity, but it really helps to keep writing going.
Oh yeah.
Having a community is really, that was the best thing about being a fan fiction writer and starting that way, was that there was this immediate community. And one of the first things I did when I sort of made the move to horror is I started seeking out community. So I went on Twitter and I found the Twitter people and I found people I could talk to. And now I'm on several Discord servers, and that it helps a lot in a ton of ways, because you have people who can read for you, which is really helpful to get feedback. And also being surrounded by people who've been doing it for longer and seeing how they deal with rejection, which you get rejected a lot, and like everybody gets rejected, and knowing that is really helpful.
Yeah. I submit for rejection. So that's my psychological maneuver is I say I'm submitting to be rejected. And then when I do get an acceptance, it's like a surprise.
It's like, yay, that's really good.
So I have a question. Why? I'm not assuming that you only write horror, but you wrote an excellent horror story for Witch House. So why do you like to write cosmic horror? Is cosmic? Are you interested in horror, or is that term cosmic horror, that more granular genre, is that interesting to you, or are you just interested in horror in general?
Yeah, I think cosmic horror is definitely my favorite, like, subgenre of horror. When I read, I have read a lot of Lovecraft. I grew up reading Lovecraft. When I think about what scares me, it's the kind of things that you find in cosmic horror, the unknowable, fear of the unknowable, and the unknown and the unknowable. Like, you can't, it's just so far out of our minds that it would make you insane, if you could understand it. So anything, like I'm writing a story right now where there's a stick that has symbols carved into it, and there's a character who's trying to trying to look at the symbols, and it's making his head hurt. And I'm just like, for me, I'm like, oh, that's just like, oh, that's perfect, right?
Yeah.
Like it just makes your brain hurt to even try to comprehend it. So, so I like to read it. It's really my favorite to write. Just that sort of, it's weird. I don't know. Like things are weird, man. And it's really fun to write. I do write a lot of other kinds of horror too, but I think that cosmic horror is my favorite. So I was really happy when you accepted my story.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I think that cosmic horror there's something about like being in the the modern world that's the kind of horror that scares us is it's not so much the supernatural, it's like beyond the natural, it's beyond what we can comprehend.
Yeah. All right. So talking about the unknowable, what makes writing scary, or I guess what makes a piece of fiction scary? And related to that, how do you as a writer frighten or disturb your readers with your stories?
Yeah. So what's funny is you sent me these questions ahead of time, so I had time to think about it. And the first time I read this, I was like, "What makes writing scary?" And I'm like, "Writing is so scary because it's like hard and this." And I was like, "Oh no, that's not what they mean. What you mean is like, how is it writing scary stuff?" I think when I'm reading, so I'm going to start by saying, I don't think that I have really written very much that's scary exactly, like in my own writing. I think I like to think that sometimes I am able to, probably disturb is the better word, with my writing, by suggesting things that probably shouldn't be actually happening. So this story is kind of a good example of that kind of thing, because so the story starts out, this guy, his wife leaves him, and then there's a hole in the floor of his bedroom. Brent, thank you. Brent's wife leaves, Trisha, right? Her name is Trisha. Yeah. And now there's a hole. Is there a hole? Was there always a hole? And the hole, of course, changes over time in various ways. And but what's really happening, and what is in his head? And I feel like it's not like terrifying, but I think it's
unsettling,
sort of unsettling. Yeah. And when I'm reading, I feel like I've read a lot more stuff that's scary than what I write. And Laird Barron wrote a short story that it starts out, I can't remember the name of the story. But it starts out, and there's a woman, and she's saying there's a baby crying, and I got to go check on the baby. And then she realizes there's no baby, right? There's no baby in my house. Like, I find that really scary. Like, there's a thing, but there's not the thing. And like people, like I think my brother walks in the room, but my brother lives on the other side of the country, and like that kind of thing really.
A couple of nights ago, we were roasting vegetables, and our stove, as it cools down, I learned this a couple of days ago. I was sitting in the kitchen, and I thought that someone from inside of the oven was banging to get out, but it was because the metal was collapsing or something. And then of course Nicole says, "Oh, it always does that." Meanwhile, like my heart's going like, but when these moments of inconsistency,
I love that.
I wanted to the Gift of Comprehension, by the way, is the name of the story. It's 5 pages long. It's compressed. It's excellent. But one of the elements of that story that I find so unsettling is the and this is maybe why I compared it to Poe, was the abnormal psychology, like the way that Brent not only is this whole strange, but he becomes like, fascinated by it, like it like draws him in. And when characters so for example, the movie The Fly, like where as he starts to change and his consciousness starts to to kind of turn, when there's like strange instincts taking over, like that always disturbs me. And I feel like you hit that note really well in that story.
Thank you. Thanks.
But So,
Well, like, I just
please.
wanted to comment on it too, because one of the things that struck me about the story that was, it was more like you said it was kind of sad. And I think it is a very sad story because the hole in the floor just ends up more representing like Brent's kind of denial of the situation. Like the way I read it is he's focusing all of his attention on this hole, but in the same time, and this is why I thought your attention to detail was so good, almost every paragraph still mentions Trisha. Like he's still very much focused on her, even though I read it as it was him trying to literally escape pain and unhappiness and loneliness, right? By projecting into this hole. And as it was getting bigger, I saw it as more metaphorically representing his own kind of growing anguish with his life and what's happening. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? Like the thing that makes writers like Lovecraft and like what you've done in this story is that you take something that's very human, like Lovecraft focuses on fear. I think you're focusing on like sadness. And you're just like emphasizing it, but through other means, right? You're drawing attention to the disturbing quality or like the just kind of horrorness of being alone and of being sad and of being rejected. But you're focusing it through by like illusion in this case with the hole in the floor. And I thought that was so well done. Like that's what made the story relatable, right?
Yeah. And if I can skip ahead, because I think talking about the source or the origin of the story, because at the time that I wrote the story, my sister's husband had just died. And
sorry to hear that.
So yeah, it was really, he was 50. He had a like surprise heart attack, like out of the blue. And she lives, we're in Philadelphia and she lives down near DC. So we had to like pack up the car and drive down. Her daughter was 10 at the time. So we all had to go down, my family. And it was like this really weird, never had anything happen like that before, right. So I was supporting my sister and her daughter, and she's trying to do all this stuff. And at the same time, my brother-in-law, I loved him dearly, but he wasn't my favorite person. Yeah. So I was sort of dealing with like, and I never would have wanted him to die, but I was also like, I don't want to say I was like there wasn't a conflict, but I was still feeling really weird. Like the whole thing was just like very, very sudden and weird. And I had kind of been thinking about writing a story about a hole. Because I feel like there's a great genre of like stories about unknowable holes. And I'd love to say that The Cipher by I'm going to forget her name. But The Cipher is a novel that was written in the sort of the late 90s. That's about a great novel about a hole. And I only read that in the past few months. So that wasn't really an influence, but that and like the tunnel or the tower from Annihilation is another great sort of unknowable hole. House of Leaves.
Oh yeah.
That's a great one.
Basically like contains this unknowable hole. And so I'd sort of been thinking about that, but there was something about this trauma happening to me and around me. And I feel like there's nothing in this story. Like I wouldn't say that either Brent or Trisha were like my sister or her husband or me or anything like that. But it was like almost a way for me to work through some of this stuff that I was thinking, because it starts out with loss. The story starts with loss and the story ends with loss. But in between you have this inability to deal with loss. And I feel like there was sort of a lot of that going into it. Yeah. So yeah,
there is so much in this story. Like the by the way, if you haven't read the story and you're listening to this, you should probably stop and go read the story. It won't take you long. It's 5 pages. But like, I was thinking like about, in science, like a perfect void. Like even in a perfect void, there's like potentiality inside of it, and like it's about loss, but then there's this like inverse, kind of presence afterwards that's really disturbing. Like when he learns that Trisha has died, literally like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up when like he goes to the hole and he hears her voice. Like that was like so cool. So I'm not sure like allegorically like what does that mean? This when you lose somebody, then they actually appear to you, but like. There's something there. It's very evocative, is what I'll say. So.
Yeah, thanks.
It's and that I interpreted it as like I try not to like, well, what's a symbol? What is this equals this? But I guess I interpreted the black hole as a kind of grief or basically depression. It's like his psychological state, symbol for his state.
And it reminded me in a similar way to the Telltale Heart, right? Where like the protagonist is very like focused, and obviously it's very different in some ways, but still like that kind of focus on something that's happening like underneath him and around him, and it consumes him. I really did think about Poe reading this story as well.
That's such a flattering comparison. I love that, because honestly I wasn't thinking about Poe at all when I wrote it. It wasn't like I'm going to try to write like Poe. It was just getting this thing out of my head, that I wanted to.
I want to be clear. Like I don't think it's like pastiche. Like it's not written in this old style, but just like in the form and also the form, just the way it's just kind of so compressed and direct, and every word is serving a purpose. Every passage is serving a purpose. There's another essay, philosophy of composition. I already mentioned philosophy of composition. That it seems like this is a modern version of that. You can read philosophy of composition is about how Poe wrote The Raven, but it's also how to write like a really compressed, direct story. And I feel like somebody could do a modern take on that and then bring in your story as an example. So.
Yeah, and it's just to say too, it's difficult to write concisely and completely, right? So, and that's one of the things that I think is interesting about Jay's project to do these amateur zines, is it's really forcing writers to work in genres that aren't necessarily so mainstream, but there obviously are a lot of readers out there who are interested in this kind of these kinds of stories, and to do it in such a small amount of words. I mean, that takes a lot, like, and I think you're doing it really well. It was a very compelling story. Like I couldn't stop reading it once I started.
Thanks. So Jay, remind me, what's the word count for
2,500 words.
2,500 words. Yeah. So which is pretty short. Mine is shorter than that. I think mine is closer to.
I think it's 1,900 or so. Or
19, maybe that 2,000. Yeah. I think at one point it was 1,500, and I kept editing it until it was a little bit, just to make it.
We usually have the problem of Luke. I actually asked Luke Dodd, the editor of Witch House, to join us for the interview. He couldn't tonight because he actually does a podcast. He records. His podcast is called the Crimecast. It's about sword and sorcery, he's very adamant about like anything over 2,500 is an automatic rejection. I won't read it. So, but you should ask this last question, Nicole, because then I'll go back to ask questions, because I think you're up. You were on the plate for a question.
So wait, do you want me to read number 6?
Which one did you? Or number 5?
No, Cass already answered that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I skipped ahead. That was me.
Okay. No, that's totally fine. So number 6 then, Jay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So do you have any general advice for readers or listeners who are considering getting into writing? How do you go from a writer curious person to an actual writer?
Yeah. So having done this, I think that the general advice is really, a couple things. One is just start writing. Like, don't be afraid to just sit down and open a Google Doc or get a notebook if you prefer to write by hand, and just start writing stuff. Like, not everything is going to be good. It's just about getting ideas on the page. It's figuring out your voice. I'm still figuring out what my voice is, if I have one. I feel like everything I write is slightly different. Like, I'm still kind of trying to figure that out. But the only way that you're going to do it is if you actually do it. And I don't know if you are just starting and you don't know, like, people don't sit down and write a story and then send it in. It's like you have drafts and you have edits, and this is the second thing, is finding some kind of community of people around you who are also writing, who will be supportive of you and not jealous of you, which is something that you have to, work on. But if you can find good people who will read your writing and give you good, really helpful feedback, and helpful feedback will mean things like not them trying to make you write the story that they would have written. Like, that's not helpful, but people who kind of get what you're trying to do and will help you get there. And also then you can read their stuff too, and you can see what they do well, and you can learn from them. Like, that's a really great thing about community. Another great thing about community is that sort of learning aspect. Do that first. And then there's a lot of options for like online workshops and things. Let's see. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I think probably if you Google, you'll find like, a few hours in the week. You don't have to do a whole MFA. Maybe write for a while and see if this is really what you want to do. Like, I'm not going to do an MFA. I have enough other things to do, but I can write, I can sit in the evenings and write, and I can share with my friends and see what they're doing. And if you want to...
Hey, I think that sometimes, with all due respect to anybody who has an MFA, I think there is a kind of like MFA style that...
I wasn't going to say it, but you can say it.
Okay, that I'm kind of tired. Like, it's just, you can tell, this person has been normed, basically. Their style has been kind of academically... And I teach creative writing, so I can say that. I can, but I try not to...
And there aren't too many programs, or at least the last time I was looking into this, there aren't too many MFAs or even just MA in creative writing that will focus on genre. I can think of like maybe a couple off the top of my head. I'm sure there are more. But yeah, in particular, if folks are interested in writing genre, I think doing what you recommend, like trying it out for a while, trying to find some communities. And that's the cool thing about now, like the post-COVID world, is we're all familiar with how to use different types of community platforms like Discord. And there's so many options out there. A lot of them are, open to join, or maybe you might have to submit like a short piece of writing or answer some questions. But yeah, I mean, finding the people who will support you in the way that you need supported, I think is really, it's important. It's not a necessity. You can write on your own, but to have a group, it just makes writing so much more pleasurable.
Yeah. And I think it can also help a lot with rejection, which is another, if you want to write professionally, and which is instead of just sharing with your friends, which is totally, fine and valid if you want to do that. But like, I think most people probably are like, I'm going to get stuff published. And that means, putting yourself out there and sending it in to somebody who's might say no, will very likely say no. And so, so having a community of people around you who are also being told no all the time, when you know that they're amazing, but they're being told no. And sometimes I get told yes. So maybe I'm good too. That's a really good, having a thick skin is important. I've known more than one person who got like 1 or 2 rejections and was just like, I can't deal with this rejection. And I get rejections every week, and I just turn around and submit the story somewhere else. And then sometimes they get published, and that's really nice.
Who's the author who wrote The Art of the, what was it? The
War of Art.
The War of Art. Yeah.
That was by,
I can't think of his name.
I can't remember his name.
He wrote.
He's a historical fiction. He's a historical. He's a novelist.
But he has a great line in that book about writing that says like rejections are proof that you're doing the work. So yeah, when I teach creative writing at our university, and I actually require my students to submit poems that they've written in my class. And yeah, most of them get rejected. There's been a handful over the years that have gotten publications, which is super cool. But I tell them like, if you're going to do this, you have to get used to rejection. And it's just proof that you're doing the work, and everyone gets rejected. So it's not a big deal.
So I'm going to ask the last question, and it's kind of a two-parter. More general question, which is, what would you like writers to take away from your writing? And then also, what are you working on right now? You said you are submitting stories as they come in. Are there any big projects? Are you working on any like an anthology, a short, a novel? So yeah, I guess that's two questions.
Yeah. So what do I want people to take away from my writing? I'd love it if people feel something coming out of it, like feel some kind of way. Sometimes it's going to be funny. Like I feel like I have this story is not funny, the one that I wrote for you, but I have other stories where I feel like there's a sense of humor there, even when bad things are happening. So if I can get somebody to laugh, if I can get, I write relationship stories, not necessarily romantic, but also like family. And if I can convince you that these people really care about each other, whatever is happening around them, and maybe you can get that in this story a little bit, even though Brad isn't really sure. But I think that like feeling or thinking, I'm also a big nerd. And so I'm a special collections curator in my real life. And I work primarily with medieval manuscripts.
Oh my gosh.
I can get really weird about them. So I've been writing stories that include like details about it. So maybe if you read one of my stories where I talk about medieval manuscripts and you feel like I've learned something, that would be pretty neat
That's
too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm now intimidated by you because I've been into some special collections with like pulp magazines, and they give me gloves and stuff, and I break things and I get yelled at. I don't really get yelled at, but I get like people narrow their eyes at me.
Actually, medieval manuscripts are very much more sturdy than pulp magazines are going to be. Like they were made to last. So like 1,000-year-old book, like it's not likely you're going to to that. Actually,
okay, good.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and so the second part of that. Oh, what am I working on?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. I have some things that have been accepted already that are coming up. I actually have a story that I wrote about a cursed medieval manuscript.
Oh, wow.
That's going to be that's really fun. I wrote it for a splatterpunk anthology called Scraps, which is being edited by someone named Judith Sonnet, who's really big in like splatterpunk and extreme horror. And I was really thrilled to be included because I'd never written anything remotely like that before. But the manuscript curse is very awful and does like terrible things to the human body. So that was really fun. And that's going to be coming out in January. And I have a couple of other anthology
What's that
stories
anthology called that it's going to be in?
It's called Scraps.
Oh, Scraps. Okay. You said that.
Yeah, Scraps. Yeah. And then I'm going to be in Dark Blooms, which is an anthology of women coming of age, like girls coming of age. And that's edited by Ruth Anna Evans, and that'll be out, I think, in January or February. I have a story in an anthology, Escalators to Hell, which is awesome. A mall. It's very cool. It's mall horror, like horror stories set in malls. And I wrote about a cursed kiosk. There's no manuscript, but it's still pretty fun. And then I wrote a story for an anthology with Hungry Shadows Press that is It Was All a Dream Too, is the name of the anthology. And it's like movie tropes, horror movie tropes that you don't like done well.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, my story is called Emily's Teeth, and it is sort of a commentary on sex in horror movies. And by the title, you can probably tell what it's about.
Okay.
But I'm not going to say anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm writing. I'm writing this story right now. I don't want to say too much about it, and I'm probably going to, jinx myself. But the Horror Writers Association is doing an anthology of sort of scary stories for kids between about 8 and 12 that are based on classic children's stories that are in the public domain. And so I'm writing something for that. They're going to accept like 3. I'm not counting on getting in, but I'm having a lot of fun kind of figuring it out. And I have other anthologies that I'm writing from. I tried doing NaNoWriMo. I was going to do NaNoWriMo, and I have this fantastic idea for a really terrible, gross, heartbreaking novel, and I'm just having a lot of trouble writing it. So no luck with that. But I can write those short things. There's something really satisfying about writing something and getting it done, and then writing something else. This is my short. I mentioned at the beginning that I have a short attention span, and this is like how it shows itself. Is I just write short stories all the time.
No, I completely relate. I have yet to write a novel or anything approaching a novel. I've written a novel and stopped, but I've only ever published short stories. There's something about that long form that it's just
really hard.
It's probably coming. Let's hope it comes in the future. But man, that's like really inspiring. All the work all the stuff you have going on. That's intriguing. And that mall horror anthology, I'm going to be checking that out. So
it's going to be really fun. I'm excited for it. Yeah.
Well, do you have any last questions, Nicole?
No, that was it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is awesome. I really appreciate it. And the gift of comprehension. It's a story about a man who discovers a small hole in his bathroom.
Bedroom.
I'm sorry, bedroom.
Yeah, bedroom floor.
Bedroom floor. So check it out. All right. Well, take care.
All right.